Hey y'all, Caleb here. So in today's video, I'm going to walk through creating a PowerShell script to create Azure VMs. Um, so the first thing you're going to want to do is you're going to want to download and install the Azure CLI, and I'll have a link for that in the description. So everything with the Azure CLI starts with AZ. There is another command line tool called Azure PowerShell, and it'll start with stuff like Git module. We're not going to be using that today. It's still used for a number of things, but the replacement or the successor to it is Azure CLI, and it works in PowerShell and Bash equally. So once you've got that installed, you're going to want to do an AZ login, and that will open up a new browser where you'll log into your Azure account. And then based on your account and your subscription, the CLI will have all the options that are available to you. So let's take a look. If we just do AZ, you'll see there's a lot of stuff that you can do through the command line interface, right? I would say a good percentage of the things you can do on the Azure website and inside the GUI, you can do with the CLI. So today we're going to be creating a PowerShell script that will allow us to create VMs as needed. And if you're just doing this for yourself, right, you're creating a VM that you're going to be using, then this won't be that useful. But if you're working like for a company or in a large corporation, you're having to create and delete VMs for different users, this becomes really valuable after the first couple of times that you use it. So the first thing we're going to want to do is we're going to want to create a couple of variables that we're going to be using in our AZ CLI commands. And in PowerShell, to denote a variable, you put the a $sign in front of it. And so what this is basically going to say is this is the VM name that I want to use in all of my commands. We're also going to do one for a resource group. So we're just going to say Caleb's group. And then we're going to do one for password. And this is just going to be the password that will be used to log into to the VM once it's been created. You don't necessarily need to do this one here if you're doing a simple VM, but we're going to go ahead and do it anyway. So we're going to do password. And then the next thing we need to make sure is that we have a resource group or have Caleb's group already created. Typically for me, I already have a couple of resource groups that you know are buckets for different things. But if you don't have a resource group yet, you can do Azure group create, and then do -- name, which is going to be one of the parameters, and it's going to be the resource group. And then we're going to do location, which for me is the closest one. Is Central US. Okay. So once we've created the resource group, then we can go and create the VM. And I want to show you the CLI has a lot of documentation on help or things you can do with all their different commands inside the CLI. And as you can see here, we just did Azure VM create help, and it gives us a lot to work with. So pretty much when you're creating a VM, anything that you would do through the website or would need to do, you can do through this. So we're going to do AZ VM create. And one thing we're going to start using here is backticks. In PowerShell, one of the ways that you can do a multi-line command is by using backticks. And the reason we're doing this is if we didn't, this line could get really long and could be more difficult to read. So we're going to use backticks and just indent our parameters, and that will allow us to read things more easily. Okay, so we're going to be using the resource group we created. And then I think the next step is we're going to need to give it a name, which is going to be the name the variable we created up top. And then the next thing we're going to need is an image that we want to use when creating this VM. And there are a bunch of different ways to go find an image. You can create your own images. But what we're going to do is we're going to go into the CLI, and we're actually going to search for a Windows Pro or Windows 10 Pro image. And I'm going to have documentation on how to do this search and how to find the appropriate image. So first thing we want to do is we just want to do a AZVM image. AZVM image list. See, it's even helping me out. So this is going to be all the images that are listed for me locally or offline. If you want to get every single image out there, you would add the -- all, as you can see right here. Since we know what we're looking for, I'm just going to paste in a command to query all the publishers with the name of Microsoft that have images in Central US. And once we hit enter, it should give us a big list back, right? And this is going to be all kinds of stuff that falls under Microsoft, not just operating systems. So we want to narrow this down a little further, and I'm going to paste in another command. And so this is going to get us a list of images that are available in Central US that fall under the product Microsoft Windows Desktop. And you see here you have a name, Microsoft Windows Server, Microsoft Windows Desktop, so on and so forth. We just want to look for Microsoft Windows Desktop. Okay. And so this is going to be a super long list with a bunch of different SKUs, different versions of Windows 10. What we're looking for is a basic Pro image. And so we're going to copy this URN, which is a combination of the publisher and the offer, and then the SKU and the version, right? So it's the combination of all those things. And we're going to do -- image and paste that in. We do not need the quotes around it. Now, the reason I actually stepped you through that process is that these images don't stay out there for forever. Microsoft will replace them as new patches come out. They only keep a certain number. So you may have an image that 3 months from now won't work anymore, and you'll need to go pull a more recent version. So that's how you would go about locating an image through the CLI in the Azure Marketplace. Now, one other thing we're going to do real quick is we're going to go ahead and save this as a PowerShell file, because by doing that, we're going to get some styling that actually makes it easier for us to dig into. So now you can see that variables are in blue, strings are in red. So this is going to be a little easier to read. So the next thing that we want to do, or the next parameter, is we need to give it an admin username. And for this, I'm just going to do VM admin. And then in this case, we also need to do admin password. And this is where I was saying the password up top isn't absolutely necessary in this instance, but it becomes valuable if you have to reuse it if you're chaining multiple Azure CLI commands. So then the next thing that is required is location, and we're going to do central US. And you can get a location or a list of locations from Azure, right? You've got East US, Central US, West US, West US 2. For me, Central US is going to be the closest to me. And then we're going to do the size of the VM. Now, this is one of those things that will determine your cost more than just about anything else. You can go into Azure and get a list of all of their SKUs, all of their setups, all of their CPUs. But what we want to do is we're just going to do a standard D2 V3, which is one of their lower end VMs. And we forgot to do backticks on all these, because if you don't put the backticks in and you go to run it, it's going to fail because it's going to have all this stuff that it doesn't know it's associated. So now that we have size, another option that we can do is tell it what kind of public IP address we want it to use. By default, it's going to use dynamic, but if you want a static IP, this is where you can set that flag or that parameter when creating the VM. For personal use, I wouldn't use a static IP because it's another cost on top of the VM as a whole. For me, I could just pull up Azure and get the right RDP info and log in that way if it does change. Typically, your IP will only change if you stop your VM or if there's an issue and it has to be restarted. In that case, it will get a new IP. Otherwise, your IP is not going to change. If you are working in a corporate environment, you're probably going to want a static IP in case those instances when things do go offline, or if, for instance, you're using tasks to manage when VMs are on or off to save money. So for this one, we're just going to leave it as static. And then you're going to need to give it a VNet name. And when I say need to, this isn't absolutely necessary. If you don't put this in here, it will create a VNet for you. And if you have multiple VMs and you don't designate a VNet name, it will actually associate your VM with an existing VNet up to a certain amount. I think it's a limit of 10 VMs on one VNet. One thing to keep in mind is if you just let it get assigned to a VNet, one of the things I'm going to show you when deleting VMs won't work or may actually cause problems. So it's safest just to go ahead and assign a VNet name of the same VM when you're creating it. And the last thing we're going to want to do for creating this VM is we're going to want to give everything associated with the creation of this VM a tag of VM name equals true. And the reason we're doing this tag is it's going to make it easier for us to delete this VM later on. So that is all the parameters for creating the VM. We need to do one more thing, and that's we want to open port 3389, which is RDP, and we for resource group RG and VM name VM. Now, in a corporate environment, you may not be able to do this. And if you're doing this through the website, Azure's even going to warn you, hey, this isn't secure. You're going to have a public IP address that anyone can hit. They may not be able to log in, but they can still access it. Azure actually suggests you use their Bastion to remote into a VM, but that's a topic for another video. Okay, so we've got our PowerShell script. Now you can run this in the terminal inside VS Code if you want. And I just did Control-Shift backtick, but I'm going to do it in con-emo just so you can see exactly what's going on. You can copy and paste. and it's going to, okay. So we copied and pasted it to let it do its thing. And you'll see we got an error that the password length was invalid, right? It's too short. You'll also see that it actually did create the resource group, Caleb's group. So let's go back into Visual Studio and let's make this one longer. And because the creation of the VM failed, but the creation of the resource group didn't, we're just going to remove that. There's one other thing that I realized I made a mistake on. You know how I mentioned the backticks before? You have to have one after each line. I failed to do it for the VNet line, which was actually making the rest of the commands basically just fail because it didn't understand what they were, so it just basically ignored them. So let's just open it up here, put it into Visual Studio Code, and then let's run it from here. And what it's going to do is it's going to start this running. And this is typically going to take a few minutes, 5 or more. But because you've got the script, right, you can set this off running and go do something else and come back, and it'll be ready for you in a short amount of time. One of the other things we can go do is we can actually go watch as it builds out the different pieces that it needs for the VM. And with an Azure VM, there's actually a number of different things you're going to have. You're going to have your virtual network, security groups, your IP address, the VM itself. So it spun most of the things it needs up, and now we just have to wait for it to finish. Okay, so you see there's the first part is complete, and that is the virtual machine. And it should shortly show us everything else. And there we go. So you can basically scroll through and you can see everything that's been set up for your VM. Okay, so then the next thing we're going to want to do is go into Azure, and you can download your RDP file. So you click Connect and RDP. And again, Azure suggests that this isn't the most secure way of handling this, but you can download your RDP file, open it up, and then use the username and password that we set up in the script to log in and do whatever you need to on your brand new Windows 10 VM. So one more thing I want to show you, and that is how to delete the VM and all associated resources easily. Of course, you can go into your resources and you can just select the items you want to delete manually. But if you have a lot of resources, a lot of stuff going on, you don't want to delete something incorrectly, right? You don't want to remove something that you shouldn't have removed. And that's where the tags came in. So you can see this has the tag of VM name true. And this has the same tag. What we can do is we can actually, and I've got a script here that I'm just going to copy and paste and go over it. What we can actually do is we can do a query to delete resources in Azure based off of tags that are associated with that item. So here we've got the VM name, which is the exact same name as the name of the VM we created. And we're basically, what we're doing here is we're going to all the resources and we're deleting all of the IDs where tag is VM true and they match the query, right? So if we run this, it is actually going to go through and find all the tags and delete all the resources for us without us having to question, is this one going? Do we need to remove this one? And this won't take nearly as long to run as the other one, or as setting up it does, and it'll basically return you a response, a bunch of nulls for every resource it deleted. Okay, guys, I think that's going to be it for this video. If you have any questions or comments, feel free to leave them below. And I hope y'all have a great day. Bye, y'all.